Thank you everybody for watching. Today we have with us Vir Sanghvi, one of the greatest writers and journalists of our time, and he's come up with a new book called A Rude Life, and he's been kind enough to talk to me on the show. Vir, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Ambika.
I read your book. Took me a while to read the 400, more than 400 pages. So
It's a big book, 61 chapters.
you have met and traveled with most of India's most renowned politicians. So who, according to you, is your favorite?
Sonia Gandhi, without a doubt.
Yeah, I could sense that though. I could sense that in your book. Why?
Because here's this woman who came to India to marry the man she loved, who knew she was being brought into a political family, but worked very hard to keep him out of politics. Then, against all her wishes, he joins politics. And then there's a terrible tragedy. Her mother in law is killed in front of her almost. She fights and fights with her husband not to join politics, saying they will kill you. And he joins, saying they will kill me anyway. And that happens. Her worst nightmare comes true. Her husband is murdered. She tries to lead a quiet life. She tries to have nothing to do with politics. The party of her husband, her mother in law, collapses before her eyes. Despite being temperamentally completely unsuited to politics, because despite being an introvert, despite being a very shy person, she goes into politics, is described by everybody as being an idiot, a person who has no business being in politics. Against the odds, she defeats someone like Vajpayee, who's one of our greatest prime ministers, and keeps her party in power for 10 years. How can you not like this kind of woman or admire her achievements?
All right. India's best statesman.
In history, Jawaharlal Nehru, so no contest.
And somebody you met?
Well, of our prime ministers, the one who was most statesmanlike was Vajpayee. Of the current politicians, the one I think is most statesmanlike, and if he's given opportunities, will grow into a really major statesman, is Shashi Tharoor.
Three most interesting people you have interviewed and why?
Amitabh Bachchan, because he's a difficult person to interview. I was interviewed by Barkha Dutt, who said it was the most difficult interview of her life. So therefore, for an interviewer, Amitabh Bachchan is a challenge.
Why?
If you can get
I'm wondering as a journalist, why would you say he's so tough to interview?
Because everybody who's interviewed him finds that he gives monosyllabic answers. He doesn't really say anything he doesn't want to. He's never honest about himself. He never lets you look into his soul, in a sense. So for an interviewer, he's a major, major challenge. If you can get him to open up, if you can get him to talk about himself, then you come away quite satisfied. So Amitabh Bachchan, I think, would be, for any journalist who's had a successful interview with him, a triumph. The Dalai Lama, because he's so different from the image. He'll sit down with you. He'll talk about anything from sex to vegetarianism to whatever. He's playful. He has no sense of, like Indian gurus, he has no sense of being this wonderful guy. He's happy, go lucky. He's almost childish some ways. He'll chat to you about anything. So the Dalai Lama. Tony Blair, because he's one of the smartest people I've interviewed. Very, very smart, very, very witty, and you never catch him on the wrong foot.
What's the art of being shrewd?
I don't know. If you find out, tell me. All my life, I haven't been shrewd enough. I wish I knew.
I have met many journalists, and to attain the kind of success, you've met so many people who are shrewd, and you have to be a bit on your toes and on top of your game to reach where you have in your career. What do you think is the right formula?
I think, Ambika, in my case, it's more luck than talent or shrewdness or anything. I was just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. I have met journalists who people would consider cunning or shrewd, etc. Yet such is the nature of journalism, and you will know this yourself because you're an essentially straightforward and simple person who's also become famous and gone very far. It's not a medium where it helps to be cunning. The viewer, the reader can see through it. And if the viewer feels you're genuine or sincere, that's the only thing that works. Shrewdness and cunning don't work.
What are the professions of the future that you reckon people should gear up for? Because the world around us is changing so fast.
Well, I think the old professions will not die. The world's second oldest profession, must be advertising and PR, and it will survive because people will still need to sell goods, will still need to create favorable impressions. For the rest of us, I'm not sure the professions will change, the technology will change. Like, for instance, let's take you. You made your name on satellite television, yet here are you on an internet site talking and having roughly the same influence you had even on satellite television. So the vehicles will change, the technology will change, but the professions will remain broadly similar.
Post pandemic, how do you think the world is going to change?
Well, because it's hard to say. No, it's already changed. It's changed in the sense that while we do meet each other and we talk to each other, a certain amount of warmth is missing. Like, for instance, assuming there was no pandemic and assuming you and I were sitting across each other in a room and we were chatting, I'm not saying this interview would be better, but there would be a certain amount of warmth in it, a certain amount of chemistry, which no matter how much you try, and we're both professionals and we try our hardest, when you do it on a Zoom link or you do it on computers, it doesn't really work. In offices, when you try and do meetings on Zoom, you can't really motivate people. You can't really get the measure of people. My worry is that because people have got so used to doing things this way, we'll go on to this socially distanced, technology driven way. And in the process, we lose the warmth of human contact. We lose the charm of human contact. When you meet people, you can often tell where they're vulnerable, where they're weak, where you can help them. On a Zoom call, it's hard to tell. So I think, in a sense, the world is lacking in compassion. And it's possible if we keep on this way, we will become an impersonal and not very compassionate society.
What's your view on the future of India's political scenario?
I think at the moment it looks very dismal and gloomy. There's basically one party rule. The opposition hasn't got its act together. The party in power doesn't have much time for the opposition. It has less time for criticism. So if this goes on, I fear for the institutions of liberal democracy. So it's possible to be gloomy. On the other hand, when things end, they end very suddenly. During the emergency, we thought it would go on forever, and it didn't. So it's always better to be an optimist, no matter how bad things look at the moment.
Your take on the present day political and economic dispensation?
I think economically we're in a mess. There was a time, say 10 years ago, when we thought we'd get rid of this India Pakistan hyphen and it would be India China. And we kept talking about ourselves as an economic superpower. It's clear we're not going to go anywhere near China in the foreseeable future. We're chugging along, but we're chugging along at a rate that was unsatisfactory even before the pandemic, got worse for reasons nobody could control during the pandemic. And now it's an open question how much we can recover. So economically, I think we're in a bad time.
Now, I have read your book cover to cover, but you do not talk about any regrets being a writer. But I wanted to ask you, have you had any regrets being a journalist, a writer? And if not a writer, what would you have been?
If not a writer, I don't know. It's a little bit like asking a caterpillar, if you don't become a butterfly, what would you become? So, because as I say in the book, I got into this by accident and one thing followed the other, it never occurred to me that there was another thing I could do. If I'd had my own way and I'd sat down and worked out what I wanted to do, possibly a lawyer.
The entire Radia tapes incident would have had a huge impact. Do you think back then you could have done something differently, or maybe done something to avoid being in that situation, or not?
It's very difficult to avoid being in that kind of situation if somebody illegally tapes conversations, doctors them, and then uses the PR machine to send them to newspapers and magazines. The individual is quite powerless in the face of that kind of industrial business might. So there wasn't much I could do, but I didn't realize then, and none of us realized that how much social media was manipulated. In that period, most newspapers regarded these tapes as suspect, which of course they turned out to be doctored, and were cautious. They were pushed into doing the stories because there was this huge wave of outrage and anger on Twitter. In those days, we believed that people on Twitter were genuine. Now we know about the IT cell, we know about troll factories, we know about glove puppets. And I remember being very hurt by all the stuff that was being said on Twitter. Now people say worse things to me every day, and I don't take it seriously because I know it's coming from a bot.
Now, your take on the current day media, which has become so virtual, and your growth path in it?
Well, I mean, the virtual media are in some ways a bad thing because they are so fragmented. And because of the fragmentation, you don't necessarily find it easy to impose editorial standards on them. So that's a bad thing. On the other hand, I used to always say that freedom of the press is guaranteed to anyone who happens to own one. So in the old days, you were totally dependent on proprietors. If proprietors and companies didn't like what you said, or didn't like your face, didn't like your haircut, you were out on your backside. That's changed now. People can create their own platforms, they can go out. So the bad effect is the drop in standards. The good effect is the empowering of the individual.
If you could have dinner with 5 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Can I pick fictional characters? That's always more fun.
Sure.
Wonder Woman, definitely. James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, Bruce Wayne, and probably one other woman. I can't figure one out, but I'll think of one.
What is your anti-aging regime?
Actually, I look really old. So, no, I don't have an anti aging regime. I dye my beard, which I think should be obvious. I'm lucky, touch wood, to have had remained black, but my hair's remained black, but I'm bald at the back. So, there's pretty much a trade off in terms of color and number of hairs on head. But the rest of it, no, I don't have one. I don't moisturize. I don't do anything at all.
5 favorite restaurants.
I like Indian accent in Delhi. I like Americano in Bombay. I like in Bangalore, Karavali. Bangalore is where I am at the moment. So that's 3. I like Dampuk in Delhi. I mean, there are Dampuks all over. And I like Som in Bombay, which is a smallish restaurant which does chaat and Gujarati food. When I'm a Gujarati. So
5 favorite hotels.
I'm doing this interview from the Gardenia in Bangalore, which is one of my favorite hotels in India. My favorite hotel in India, apart from the Gardenia, would be the Oberoi in Bombay, which has always been the best run city hotel. I like the Gritti Palace in Venice because I think that's beautiful. That's on the Grand Canal. I like the Bristol in Paris, which is a city hotel, but is incredibly well run. In Bangkok, I like the Anantara Siam, which is a really well-run hotel. So Neva Fushi, which I've just come back from in the Maldives, would be one of my favorite hotels.
5 favorite holiday destinations.
Bangkok, which I always think in some ways is my second home. It's the city I love very, very much. I like the Maldives, which we've just talked about. I love Rajasthan. I love almost everything about Rajasthan. I went to school in Rajasthan, so I like to think I understand Rajasthan. That's 3. I love Italy. No matter where you go in Italy, there's always some place you haven't been to. Spain, I've been discovering Spain recently. It's cheaper than the rest of Europe, lesser known, but the food is fabulous. The people are really nice, and I like it.
What's your advice to all the journalists and writers out there?
My advice to young people who are thinking of joining journalism is don't think of the kind of career path that you and I had, because we all went to work for largish organizations. Those organizations were good to us. And because they were good to us, we're now in a situation where we can do things without them. That won't happen for very long. All the organizations that employed us are struggling to survive. So if you want to join journalism, see it as an entrepreneurial activity. Work on the assumption that it's going to be just you. Nobody's going to pay you a salary. You're going to have to find a way of making a living. And if you're not comfortable doing that, don't become a journalist. Do something else.
All right. Thank you so much and good luck and have a great time in Bangalore. And I really enjoyed reading your book. And thank you so much.
Thank you.